Hey folks, on today's video I'm going to talk to you about 3 of the most common mistakes that I notice people make when drop shotting. So drop shotting is a super finesse technique most of the time. Most of the time when you're talking about fishing a drop shot, it's going to be in the context of clear water and it's going to be in the context of finesse fishing. Most of the time. Now there are some exceptions where you can kind of beef up the equipment, and there are some exceptions where I'll use it in stain to pretty heavily stained water. Very rarely, if ever, use it in muddy water. But most of the time it's in a clear water situation like you see what we have here. Super clear water, fishing for spotted bass, smallmouth. Of course, every species of bass bite a Ned rig, but I think one of the species, the 2 species that it shines on the most are spotted bass, smallmouth. So when you see that, just that context, it seems like this is just, it always ends up coming up. Of course, I've caught a lot of largemouth on drop shot, but those times, if I know a fishery has smallmouth or if it has spotted bass, I know they'll bite a drop shot. Just starting off with the rod reel line combo. One of the mistakes that I see people make the most of when fishing a drop shot is just too stiff of equipment. As I just mentioned, this is a finesse technique. So you don't need a heavy action rod. I very rarely, if ever, use bigger than 10-pound test. You can go as heavy as 12 if you really want to get excited out there. But I very rarely, if ever, I stay somewhere between 8 to 10-pound test line for every situation. There are some extreme situations where I'll go as small as 6, but I very rarely, if ever, go under 6. It's going to be 8 or 10-pound test line. This particular rod, which is my favorite rod in the world to use, this is a favorite 6-stick 7-1 medium heavy power rod. It's still got a fast action on it, but it has enough tip that 6-pound test. Obviously, with 6-pound test, if you got a heavy line, when you go to set the hook or if a fish makes a surge, you're going to break the line. The whole reason for the softer tip is to compensate for the smaller line. So make sure you got the right power and action rod. I almost, like I said, somewhere between 6 and 10-pound test is where I think the sweet spot is. If you're pairing that up with the size 2000 or 3000 series reel, you're probably going to be somewhere in the right mode when it comes to rod reel line combos. The second mistake that I most commonly see people use when talking about, there's some fish schooling right here behind me while I'm trying to tell you about drop shots, which is making me tingle a little bit, making me nervous down here. Second most common mistake that I see people make when they're using a drop shot is too heavy a sinker and too big of a hook. Finesse, 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 folks. This is not flipping bushes. This is not throwing a crankbait. This is not throwing a jig. This is drop shotting. It's a finesse technique. Too big a hook. For most of the applications where I'm going to use a drop shot, I'm most of the time using a number 1 or number 2 size drop shot. I use an owner mosquito most of the time, so I'll use those 2 hooks. The way I rig it is just a Palomar knot. The reason you use that Palomar knot is because it makes your hook stand out. I'm going to tie one up here, and I do prefer to use braid to fluorocarbon combo. So I'll use a number 1, number 2 size mosquito hook from owner. The key to making that hook stand out is to take your tag line and run it back through the eye of the hook. You watch, you'll hear a little click. Once I pull it through, you're going to hear a little click with the tag in. That little click right there, that makes the hook stand out perfectly. On the sinker, listen guys, like I fish a drop shot as deep as probably 60 foot is about the max that I fish it. I very rarely will go over a 1/4 ounce sinker. The only time I'll use anything bigger than a 1/4 ounce sinker is going to be in the context of current. I know a lot of you guys up north fish it down in current and you're trying to keep that thing on the bottom in heavy current, so maybe you do use like a 3/4 ounce. Most of the time it's just going to be just a 1/4 ounce for almost all applications. If I'm casting it, I might go lighter. I might use an 1/8 ounce, but most of the time for vertical presentation, it's this guy right here, Strike King tungsten drop shot sinker, about 18 inches of leader in between my sinker and my hook. Number 1, number 2 mosquito hook tied with that Palomar knot on that 8 to 10-pound test line. The reason you want to go with a light wire, small hook. The bigger the hook is, the more you're going to impede the action of the bait. It's not going to help you stay hooked up better. You'll catch plenty of big fish just on that number 1 and that number 2 hook right there. Anywhere from a 1.5 pound fish to an 8-pound fish you can catch on that same hook right there. So you don't have to overdo it on your hook. Light wire is important. Remember what we said at the beginning of this conversation. We only have a medium heavy power rod. Not a lot of stiffness there. We only have light line, 8 to 10 pound test. If I've got heavy line, or if I've got light line, I've got a very soft action tip, I can't get penetration with a very thick gauge hook. That's the reason we want to go with that light wire hook. Easier penetration, less resistance for that light wire, for the light line and the light power rod that we're going to be using to fish with. So you got to match your rod power, rod action with your hook size and your line size to make this system work out perfectly. My third thing that I most often see as a mistake when you're talking about drop shotting is bait selection. This is a technique where the whole reason you're using a drop shot most of the time is because of bottom contact. A drop shot just stays on the bottom much better than a Texas rig or even a Carolina rig because the weight's on the bottom, so you're allowed to, it keeps the bait on the bottom better. When I'm using a drop shot, there's very seldom times where I'll use a bait that has a lot of appendages. I like straight tail worms, I like minnow style baits, and that's pretty much it. I'll use some small stick baits. The whole reason I'm using it is for bottom contact, so appendages, all that's going to do is create more water resistance, and it's not going to let the bait sink as well. And every time that I go to put a little action on it with the rod tip, that resistance is going to make the bait want to float up. It's going to make it want to rise, when the whole reason that you're throwing a drop shot most of the time is to maintain bottom contact, keep that bait close to the bottom where the fish are. So I like to use straight tail worms, stick baits, and minnow style baits with very few to no appendages at all. The appendages I feel like work against me. Most of the time, I'm not saying that those baits don't work, but your higher percentage bait is almost always going to be a bait with fewer appendages on it. It's going to allow you the bait to sink better. It's a finesse application. So finesse application, fish usually aren't biting as well, so you want something that's easily palatable to the fish. So something that's slim, snackable, that they can bite, and it'll help you keep the bait in the strike zone where the fish are a lot better. Those are my 3 tips for you guys that are fishing a drop shot. Keep those in mind. Don't make those mistakes. Don't use too stiff a rod. Don't use too big of a hook, too big of a sinker, and don't use too big of a bait that's doing all kind of dancing and swimming around. Use something simple. Simple baits work best on a drop shot. I promise you'll catch more fish on them. So a couple of my favorite drop shot baits, I want to share with them. Some of them I don't like to tell a lot of people. I'm going to tell y'all just because you came to my YouTube channel. I'm going to tell you anyway. I got basically four that I use here a lot. One is just a straight tail worm like this right here. Good in clear water. They like those bright colors in clear water for some reason. The other is just a stick bait. Let's see, 5-inch stick bait. Oh, here they are right here outside. I already had them out. 5-inch stick bait. Actually, it's a 4-inch stick bait, I'm sorry. And then a minnow style. Pretty much all I use. So pretty much all of these baits I'm going to nose hook. I like to nose hook when I can. If I'm fishing inside of brush piles or around a lot of snags, laydowns, something like that, I will go to a Texas rig style drop shot. But for the most part, I'm just going to nose hook those baits. I got way more action because the bait is free. All I'm going to do, this is my minnow style bait. You see how simple that bait is? So easy to keep contact with the bottom because there's very little resistance with it. Because it's sleek, it's small, it doesn't have a lot of appendages, it'll sink straight to the bottom. If I'm fishing vertical, I need to run that thing down to the bottom real fast with no appendages on it. It plummets to the bottom. All I'm going to do, I'll show it to you here. Very simple. About the first 1/16 of an inch of the bait. I'm just going to poke it right through the nose like that. That's all I'm going to do with it. And that bait's going to stand out. It's free to dance and do and hula stick and hula juve and jive and do the James Brown. It'll do everything I need it to do with very little rod tip action. And it sinks faster that way. okay? Other bait is, remember I told you, I keep it simple. That's the thing, everybody wants to overthink the soft plastic. I literally have 4 baits that I use from New York to Florida. That's pretty much it, to here in South Carolina. This is a 4-inch, just straight tail worm. I ain't got nothing to talk about. It's just a straight tail worm. There is nothing fancy to tell you, folks. The only thing that I can tell you fancy about a straight tail worm, if I had one bait that I could use from now to the end of time, it would be probably a 6-inch stick bait or straight tail worm, because I can rig it 15 different ways. Now, like I just mentioned, when I'm fishing it vertical, most of the time I'm just gonna nose hook it just like that. Or you can do what we call wacky shotting, where you just hook it in the middle like that, wacky shotting. Obviously that's going to have a little bit more resistance, and this is something I'm going to fish a little bit shallower, 15 foot or shallower, because it's got more resistance. It's harder to keep it on the bottom. You can rig it those 2 ways, or you can Texas rig it as well. So straight tail worm, minnow style bait. Third one is going to be just a regular 4-inch stick bait. And I'm going to do the same thing with it. Most of the time with a 4-inch stick bait, it's just going to be a wacky shot. Just like that. Hooked it straight in the middle, throw him out, shake him, make him shimmer, make him dance, make it do the James Brown, make it do a Diana Ross, whoever you think. Dance really well. Does Diana Ross even dance? I don't think she danced. I don't even know why I thought of Diana Ross. Anyway, wacky shot. Pretty much the only way I like to rig. Of course you could nose hook or Texas style, the 4-inch stick bait. Just for me, it's primarily going to be just wacky shot. And then the one that's kind of a sleeper is just the regular TRD. Again, simple bait. There's nothing special about this thing. It ain't got nothing on it. Nothing at all, but that's the magic. I'll do the same thing, wacky shot. I'll wacky shot him just like that. Smallmouth can't stand a TRD on a drop shot. Everybody's throwing it on the Ned head, which is great, but they can't stand it on the drop shot. You can nose hook him. You can do it that way, or you can thread it up on the hook. That's another thing that I do. Sometimes I'll just thread it up on the hook. If you thread a Z-Man TRD up on the hook like I'm about to show you, this thing will last about as long as, them McDonald's fries that's in the corner of your seat that your kid dropped. I'll rig it just like that. Now that looks ugly and just dumb, but it catches them. Just rig it on a regular drop shot hook just like that. Just thread it up on the drop shot hook, throw it out. The reason it works so good like that is because the action is so limited when you rig it, thread it up on the hook like that. It doesn't do anything. It literally just sat there with no action when you work that bait that way. So those are the only soft plastics that I really use on a drop shot. It's either going to be a straight tail worm, a stick bait, or a minnow style bait. That's literally the only baits that I have in my soft plastic container here for a drop shot. And I promise you, from catching bass in Florida to catching bass in South Carolina, Georgia, to catching fish in Arkansas on Beaver Lake, to going up north fishing for smallmouth, these baits will work. They will catch fish, and you will catch everything you need to catch on a drop shot on those few soft plastics. So you don't have to go out and go crazy and buy a bunch of new baits. I do have a drop shot kit on my website, shopblat.com. We'll leave a link in the description box where you can buy the exact baits that I just showed you here, my favorite drop shot baits. On my website, shopblat.com. You don't have to guess about it. They all come in a kit, in a little bundle that you can buy and have everything you need to drop shot with.